So I just watched the Artemis Fowl movie, and I think that everybody agrees that it's not a good movie. And I was a fan of the books when I was younger and had read the first, I want to say 4 novels before I kind of stopped reading them. But after watching this movie, I have to wonder how professional screenwriters and directors cannot seem to make a halfway decent movie sometimes when there's already a story and a framework in place. I feel like if they're going to adapt a very popular book series that has millions of readers, it's safer to just stick with the original story as opposed to try to create all these other things going on. I understand that there are certain changes that need to be made when there's a book adaptation so that it makes sense when it's on the screen. Or even sometimes there are instances when changes actually improve the plot or story of the book. But in the case of Artemis Fowl, I have to wonder why they even bothered to adapt it instead of just making an original movie. I assume they want to take advantage of, the popularity of the books, but if they wanted to do that, they're kind of, 15 years too late. Now, the directing and the acting and pretty much everything is kind of bad, but I want to say that this would have been an okay movie if they at least kept a lot of the plot together. So I want to talk about a few elements that they changed in the story, which I think was a huge detriment to how the plot turned out. The first one that I want to talk about is the inclusion of the fathers in this movie, and this one is the one that I have the most problem with because I feel like it drastically changed the characterization of the 2 protagonists, as well as move a lot of the character motivations and conflict from internal to external. Artemis's father is essentially the catalyst to the plot. He gets captured by an evil fairy, the villain calls Artemis, and then Artemis reads what's already happened to his father in his diary, and then finally action starts happening from there. And there's definitely a few problems with this, and the first very obvious one is that this isn't a very interesting movie to watch when the character hasn't really done anything and we're already halfway through the movie. Another problem with this is that he's just kind of reacting to things that are happening to him. Nothing is really driven by his character. And the characterization of Artemis is really what's changed quite significantly due to the existence of his father. When you notice the beginning of the movie, there's a really bad scene with his therapist where essentially you see Artemis as a brat who is supposedly smart. Mulch has this exposition series where he tells the audience that Artemis is really intelligent, but we don't really see Artemis do anything very intelligent on his own. He's really just spoon-fed a lot of the things that is happening, especially in the beginning of the movie. If you contrast this with the books, Artemis actually takes hold of a lot of what the father does in the movie. So he's really the catalyst to the book plot because he's the one seeking out the existence of fairies and finding an alcoholic sprite, decoding books, learning about fairy rituals, and finding out a way out of the fairies' time stop machine. And this indicates to the audience from his actions along the way that he truly is really intelligent because these are really hard things to do for an adult, let alone a 12-year-old boy. So we already know that he's a prodigy, and this is a really great introduction to his character. In the movie, this really isn't the case. We don't really see any evidence of him being so intelligent and smart. We're just told that this is the case. The same can be said about Holly. I really don't know the point of shoehorning in her father into the story, and I assume that they were trying to draw some parallel between Artemis and Holly by making this unnecessary father connection, but this really just makes the relationship between Artemis and Holly feel very contrived, and I never really felt the same amount of camaraderie that they eventually developed in the books because it feels very unearned. So yeah, it kind of feels like this is a story about their fathers, except we don't really get to see that full story, and Holly and Artemis are just kind of the products of that, which is not a very compelling backbone for character development. The character of Holly, I feel like, was butchered just as badly, if not worse, than Artemis Fowl. At least with Artemis Fowl, we are told that he's a criminal mastermind, even though he's clearly not. But with Holly, a big part of who she was in the book is just completely gone from the movie, and that's because they decided to make Commander Root a woman. And Judi Dench is a great actress, and I'm sure that they wanted to utilize her effectively, but a really big part of her storyline was that Holly was the first female officer and she had something to prove, and the commander was scrutinizing everything that she did because she was essentially an experiment, and she was kind of the embodiment of whether having more female officers would be successful or not. So this is a really powerful and interesting part about her character that was really inspiring to me as a girl. So I don't know why they would remove that aspect when they clearly made an effort in terms of the cast to make it more diverse. This made Holly feel like a true second protagonist to Artemis because she was a little bit more relatable and had that underdog story. Whereas Artemis, in terms of morality, had more shades of gray and sometimes was outright portrayed a little bit villainous. They really did a disservice to Holly because now this kind of relegates her as a side character, although even Artemis feels like a side character in his own movie. This transitions into the next point that I wanted to make about moral ambiguity, which is sorely missing from this movie. In the books, I really appreciated that Artemis as a character was ambiguous himself. As I mentioned before, he's a lot of shades of gray. He's mostly motivated by greed, which is not a noble cause, but that's always kind of balanced between his struggle in doing what's right. And in the plot itself as well, you can see that you're not really sure who you should be cheering for. Artemis is the main character, so you feel compelled to want to be on his side, but at the same time, you can see why the fairies feel justified to go into his home and take what's theirs back. In the movie, this is completely changed because of the introduction of the father and the whole kidnapping scenario. Even though Artemis is described as a criminal mastermind, we don't see him actually commit any crimes. I think that it's quite noble of him to go and try to save his father. And there's really no reason for you to think that he is not right otherwise. I did see an interview with a director, or I read something that he said that a broader audience wouldn't be able to appreciate or reconcile the fact that the main character is essentially a villain, and I feel like this is really treating the audience with not very much respect. I know that the target audience is probably kids, but at the same time, over 20 million people have, read these books. So there's clearly a reason why they appreciate Artemis as a character and have followed him for, all those books. So unfortunately, the fathers are not the only unwelcome addition to this movie. I think they had to add a lot of random plot mechanics to pad the movie because they had to get rid of a lot of the themes that were existing in the book. So instead of nuanced moral ambiguity or interesting character development, they replaced it with aculos, which is some kind of, object where I guess every single fantasy movie has to have this object that lots of people are vying after because it's very, very powerful. Like this is like the Avengers or something. And there is also the big bad, which is not fleshed out at all. And, someone to fight after and, yay, the heroes win at the end. And it's just not very interesting at all and feels very rushed because this movie itself is quite short at under 90 minutes. I kind of feel like they didn't even plan to make this a franchise because I did notice that they had multiple elements from the later books just randomly thrown into this first movie. So I'm not really sure that they were planning on making any other sequels. I mean, if this is supposed to be a standalone movie, it is pretty pathetic. I also didn't really love the random changes that they made, which only further signals to me that maybe this wasn't meant to be a franchise in their eyes, but I don't know why you would adapt a popular book series if you weren't intending to maybe hope to do so. Like the name of Butler, I remember that being a thing in the books where he didn't want to say what his real name was, and that's kind of like a mystery that you expect it to be revealed later on in the books, but like in the first 10 minutes of the movie, they're like, oh, don't call him Butler, call him Dom. I don't know what the point of that is. Like, what? Also, I didn't really understand what the point of including Julia in the movie was. I mean, the movie, as I said before, was really short, so adding her just randomly as he's reading a book seemed really unnecessary. Couldn't they just have used the butler slash Dom to be his companion like it was in the books? I mean, I'm not trying to say that everything in the books was perfect and that they have to follow it exactly to the letter, but I'm really not understanding why make changes that make the movie a lot worse. So yeah, there's just a lot more going on in the movie that isn't very good, but I just want to talk about what really went wrong from the source material to the movie, because I just don't understand why you would ignore the central reasons why a book was popular and then try to still make a movie out of it. I don't know how many adaptations they need to make until they realize that it's not enough to just have the name of a super popular franchise. You need to also make a good movie, or at least be true to the source material to cater to fans if you don't want to make a good movie. I mean, you gotta choose one or the other if you're gonna put in so much money. It's kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like, how do you f something that bad? Okay, anyways, thanks for listening to my rant. Bye.